The myth of mental strength. Why most people break before they realize it. They don't scream when they break. They don't collapse dramatically. Most people break quietly, in the way they start doubting themselves, apologizing for things that weren't their fault, shrinking their ambition, and calling it maturity. The truth is uncomfortable. Most people don't break because life is cruel. They break because they never understood how power, people, and pressure actually work. We are taught that mental strength looks like optimism, that resilience means endurance, that goodness protects you, that if you stay kind, honest, and patient long enough, the world will eventually reward you. History tells a different story. Those who believed the most deeply in virtue were often the first to be destroyed by those who understood leverage. Those who trusted openly were the easiest to manipulate. Those who confused morality with protection rarely saw betrayal coming until it was already inside the walls. Modern self-help has sold us a comforting myth. That mindset alone can shield you from reality. That affirmations can overpower intention. That emotional purity makes you safe. But reality doesn't respond to belief. It responds to structure, to incentives, to power. Mental unbreakability doesn't come from feeling strong. It comes from seeing clearly. And clarity is dangerous, because once you see how things truly function, you can never unsee it. Look closely at the patterns around you. People don't exploit you because they hate you. They exploit you because you allow access without leverage. People don't manipulate you because they're evil. They manipulate you because manipulation works. Especially on those who believe everyone plays fair, people don't break you with force. They break you with guilt, with moral pressure, with social shame, with silence. The most effective control is invisible, and the most fragile minds are not the angry ones. They are the hopeful ones who believe the world operates on the same rules they do. From a young age, we're conditioned to associate strength with emotional openness. We're told vulnerability is courage, that transparency builds trust, that being real keeps you safe. But in environments shaped by competition, scarcity, and hierarchy, transparency is not bravery, it is exposure. Every time you reveal your limits, someone learns how to push them. Every time you reveal your values, someone learns how to weaponize them. Every time you reveal your fears, someone files them away quietly. Mental collapse doesn't arrive as trauma, it arrives as confusion. Why did doing the right thing backfire? Why did honesty cost me power? Why did loyalty make me disposable? Why do people who lie withhold and manipulate seem calmer, more protected, more in control? These questions are not signs of weakness. They are signs that the story you were told is starting to crack. What if mental strength isn't about resilience at all? What if it's about strategic restraint? What if emotional hardness isn't cruelty but insulation? What if being unbreakable requires shedding illusions, not building confidence? For centuries, societies have punished those who spoke this way, not because they were wrong, but because they were dangerous. They stripped morality from power. They separated intention from outcome. They exposed the mechanics behind obedience, fear, and loyalty. And when someone explains the machinery, those who benefit from it panic. 500 years ago, one man looked at human nature without romance. He studied rulers, betrayals, revolutions, and collapses, and wrote down what he saw, not what people wanted to hear. He wasn't trying to corrupt the world. He was trying to explain why it already was. For that, history labeled him a monster. But perhaps the real threat wasn't his cruelty, it was his clarity. Because once you understand how minds are broken, you also understand how to make them unbreakable. And that is where this story truly begins. Lesson I: emotional control is the first fortress. If you react, you can be controlled. Every collapse begins the same way. Not with violence, not with betrayal, but with a reaction, a spike of anger, a surge of outrage, a flash of fear that feels justified, even righteous. And in that moment, something quiet happens. You stop thinking and start responding. Machiavelli understood this centuries before neuroscience gave it a name. He observed that power does not begin with weapons, it begins with emotional access. Whoever can provoke your fear, your guilt, or your rage does not need to dominate you. You will move yourself exactly where they want. This is not a flaw in your character, it is a feature of your biology. The human brain evolved to react fast under threat. When emotions spike, the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for reason and long-term thinking, goes offline. In its place, the amygdala takes control. Fight, flee, submit, obey. Modern neuroscience calls this emotional hijacking. Machiavelli simply called it reality. Look around. Outrage cycles refresh every hour. Political theater thrives on fear and moral panic. Social media rewards the fastest reaction, not the clearest thought. The angrier you are, the more predictable you become. The more predictable you become, the easier you are to guide. This is why manipulative people rarely argue facts. They provoke feelings. They do not persuade, they trigger. Because once they control your emotional state, your behavior follows automatically. Machiavelli warned rulers about this, but the lesson applies more brutally to individuals. If someone can make you angry on command, they can make you act on command. If someone can make you afraid of exclusion, they can make you conform without force. If someone can flood you with guilt, they can extract obedience while calling it virtue. The Stoics reached the same conclusion from a different path. Epictetus wrote that people are disturbed not by events, but by their judgments about events. Marcus Aurelius warned that if you allow external things to control your inner state, you surrender your freedom without realizing it. Mental unbreakability begins here, not with aggression, not with dominance, but with emotional sovereignty. This does not mean becoming cold or indifferent. Detachment is not apathy. It is the ability to feel without being commanded by feeling. The unbreakable mind pauses where others react. It observes where others explode. It withholds where others rush forward, desperate to release emotion. This pause is not weakness. It is a fortress, because emotion is the primary lever of control in every system, from authoritarian regimes to dysfunctional relationships. The person who stays calm under pressure is immune to most forms of manipulation. They cannot be rushed. They cannot be baited. They cannot be easily shamed. This is why emotionally regulated individuals are often labeled dangerous, arrogant, or unfeeling. Not because they are cruel, but because they are ungovernable. Machiavelli never told people to suppress emotion. He warned them not to be ruled by it. The moment you feel the surge, anger, fear, moral panic, that is not the moment to act. That is the moment to slow down, because whoever made you feel that way is already trying to move you. And the first step toward mental unbreakability is simple, but brutal. Never give anyone direct access to your reactions. Once you do, the fortress is already breached. Lesson 2. Most people don't seek truth, they seek comfort. Why reality is rejected before it is understood. Truth rarely announces itself gently. It disrupts, it destabilizes, it threatens the stories people use to survive. This is why truth is so often rejected, not because it is false, but because it is inconvenient. Machiavelli learned this lesson the hard way. He did not lose his reputation because he lied. He lost it because he refused to soften reality. In Renaissance Italy, power was brutal, unstable, and unapologetic. Alliances collapsed overnight. Loyalty was transactional. Morality bent under pressure. Machiavelli wrote what he saw, not what people wanted to hear. And for that, history branded him a villain. Why? Because human beings do not orient themselves around truth. They orient themselves around psychological safety. Modern psychology confirms what Machiavelli observed intuitively. The human mind is not a truth-seeking machine, it is a threat avoidance system. We filter information not by accuracy, but by whether it threatens our identity, our tribe, or our emotional equilibrium. This is called motivated reasoning. When information challenges who we believe we are, what we believe is good, or who we believe is on our side, the brain treats it as danger, and danger must be neutralized, not by debate but by dismissal. This is why whistleblowers are rarely celebrated in their time, why dissenters are labeled unstable, immoral, or dangerous, why social outcasts are often the first to notice cracks in the system. They are not punished for being wrong. They are punished for making others uncomfortable. Machiavelli became a symbol of evil not because he promoted cruelty, but because he removed the illusion that power is fair, gentle, or moral by default. He stripped away the comforting lie that good intentions protect you, and people hate mirrors that reflect what they don't want to see. The mentally unbreakable individual must accept a brutal truth. Social approval is not correlated with accuracy. In fact, it often moves in the opposite direction. Comforting narratives spread faster than honest ones. Simple villains are preferred over complex systems. Moral certainty feels better than ambiguity. So societies reward those who reinforce the shared story and punish those who complicate it. This is why most people don't argue against uncomfortable truths. They attack the person who speaks them. They say you're cynical. They say you're bitter. They say you've lost your humanity. But what they really mean is, you've disturbed my sense of safety. Mental unbreakability is forged here, not in intelligence, but in tolerance for discomfort. The ability to sit with uncertainty, to hold ideas that isolate you, to resist the reflex to retreat into denial just to belong. This does not mean rejecting empathy or compassion. It means refusing to trade awareness for acceptance. Because once you understand this dynamic, a quiet shift happens. You stop measuring truth by applause. You stop mistaking consensus for reality. You stop assuming rejection means error. And you begin to see why so many systems remain broken, not because solutions don't exist, but because acknowledging them would require emotional pain. Machiavelli paid the price for honesty with exile, imprisonment, and a ruined legacy. But his real crime was simpler than history admits. He spoke to adults as if they could handle reality. Mental unbreakability begins when you accept this. Truth will often cost you comfort, but comfort will always cost you truth. And once you see that trade clearly, you can never unsee it again. Moral consistency makes you predictable. Why rigid ethics become leverage. There is a comforting belief many good people hold. That morality protects them. That fairness disarms aggression. That consistency earns respect. But in hostile environments, morality doesn't protect you. It exposes you. Because predictability is not virtue to those seeking advantage. It is a map. Machiavelli understood something deeply unsettling. Good people assume shared rules. Manipulators depend on that assumption. When your ethics are rigid, your reactions become reliable. When your behavior is consistent, your pressure points become visible. And once visible, they can be pulled repeatedly. History is filled with examples. Revolutionary leaders who spoke the language of justice until justice stood in the way of power. Religious authorities who preached virtue while weaponizing guilt. Empires that justified domination through moral rhetoric. The pattern is always the same. Moral language is not just a guide for behavior. It is a tool of control. Psychology explains why this works. Ethical individuals are highly responsive to shame. They fear being seen as immoral more than being disadvantaged. They self-correct before force is required. This makes them ideal targets. If you want to silence someone ethical, you don't threaten them. You accuse them. You question their intentions. You frame resistance as cruelty. You redefine obedience as doing the right thing. And often they comply. Not because they agree, but because their identity is on the line. Machiavelli observed this centuries ago, watching political actors use virtue as camouflage. He did not argue against ethics. He warned against ethical blindness. The inability to see when morality is being used against you. In modern life, this tactic is everywhere. Workplaces where loyalty is demanded but never reciprocated. Relationships where boundaries are framed as selfishness. Public discourse where dissent is labeled harm. The ethical person hesitates. The manipulator advances. Because morality without adaptability creates a dangerous illusion. That fairness will be returned. But power does not operate on fairness, it operates on leverage. And leverage is created by asymmetry. When one side follows rules and the other exploits them, the outcome is not noble, it is predictable. This is why Machiavelli wrote something so often misunderstood. He did not say, "Be immoral." He said, "Do not assume morality governs others." The most dangerous belief is not that evil exists, it is believing that goodness is automatically rewarded. Here is the realization most people resist until it's too late. The world does not punish evil, it punishes weakness disguised as virtue. This doesn't mean abandoning your values, it means owning them consciously, choosing when to be flexible, knowing when consistency becomes a liability, recognizing when moral language is being used to corner you. Mental unbreakability requires a hard distinction. Ethics are internal. Power dynamics are external. Confusing the two leads to self-destruction. The unbreakable mind does not abandon morality, it decouples it from obedience. It understands that boundaries are not cruelty. That refusal is not immorality. That adaptation is not corruption. Because the moment you realize this, shame loses its grip. Guilt stops guiding your decisions, and accusations no longer paralyze you. You begin to see moral pressure for what it often is, a test of compliance. Machiavelli was not warning us to become ruthless predators. He was warning us not to be defenseless saints. And once you understand how predictability is exploited, you stop mistaking consistency for strength. You become something far more dangerous to those who rely on control. Unpredictable, aware, and no longer easy to use. Less so naïve, silence is a strategic weapon. Transparency protects observers, not players. We live in an age that worships exposure. Speak your truth, share your journey, reveal your intentions. Silence, we're told, is suspicious. Privacy is framed as guilt. Mystery is mistaken for deception. But Machiavelli understood something deeply counterintuitive. Visibility protects the audience, not the actor. In every arena where power matters, war, politics, negotiation, silence has always been treated as an advantage. Not because it hides evil, but because it prevents exploitation. Information is not neutral, it is currency. And unlike money, information is irreversible. Once revealed, it cannot be retrieved. It cannot be retracted, it can only be used. Espionage teaches this brutally well. The most valuable intelligence is never stolen by force, it is volunteered. Through confidence, through oversharing, through the human need to be understood. Negotiation psychology confirms the same truth. The first person to reveal their bottom line loses leverage. The one who explains themselves too early weakens their position. The one who confesses intentions hands the opponent a blueprint. Yet modern culture pushes the opposite. We are encouraged to narrate ourselves constantly, online, at work, in relationships, to justify boundaries, to explain decisions, to expose vulnerabilities, and every explanation becomes data, every confession becomes context, every detail becomes leverage. Machiavelli warned rulers not to reveal intentions prematurely, not because honesty is wrong, but because clarity in hostile environments invites sabotage. This is where mental unbreakability diverges from moral comfort. You do not owe transparency to those who have not earned trust. You do not owe explanations to systems that benefit from your exposure. Mystery is not manipulation, it is insulation. Psychology shows why silence unsettles people. When information is missing, the brain fills the gap. When motives are unclear, observers lose control. Silence disrupts prediction, and prediction is power. Those who overshare become easy to manage. Those who explain themselves endlessly become easy to corner. Those who narrate every move surrender surprise. This is especially true in digital culture. Algorithms reward vulnerability, not for your benefit, but for engagement. Visibility is mistaken for authenticity. Oversharing is reframed as courage. But every post, every opinion, every confession builds a profile, a map of your values, a record of your triggers, a list of your pressure points. Mental unbreakability demands a radical shift, controlled visibility, not secrecy, selectivity. You choose what is seen. You decide what is known. You understand that not every truth needs an audience. Silence does not mean absence. It means intentional restraint. The strongest negotiators speak last. The most dangerous opponents reveal least. The hardest minds to manipulate leave gaps. Machiavelli did not advocate deception for its own sake. He advocated strategic restraint because the world does not reward transparency equally. Observers gain clarity, competitors gain advantage, manipulators gain access. You gain nothing but exposure. Here is the realization that reshapes power dynamics. The more you explain yourself, the less power you retain. Silence forces others to guess. Guessing creates uncertainty. Uncertainty protects you. Mental unbreakability is not loud. It is not performative. It does not seek validation through confession. It understands that some truths are weapons, and weapons are not left lying around. When you learn to hold information instead of broadcasting it, when you stop mistaking visibility for virtue, you stop feeding systems designed to control you, and silence stops being emptiness. It becomes armor. L'assum vi, being liked is fragile, being needed is durable. Dependence creates protection. Everyone wants to be liked. Approval feels like safety. Praise feels like protection. Popularity feels like power. But history tells a colder truth. When pressure arrives, admiration disappears first. Being liked is emotional currency, and emotions are unstable. Being needed is structural, and structures resist collapse. Machiavelli understood this with brutal clarity. In royal courts, the most charming advisors were celebrated until they became expendable. The ones who survived were not the most loved, they were the most useful. Think of the difference. A person is liked because they make others feel good. A person is needed because removing them creates consequences, and power protects consequences. Throughout history, rulers discarded favorites easily, but they hesitated to eliminate those who controlled supply lines, finances, military logistics, or information. Affection invites sentiment. Dependence invites caution. Modern psychology calls this dependence theory. When someone relies on you for outcomes, not feelings, their behavior changes. They protect the relationship not because they care, but because they must. Corporate hierarchies expose this daily. The likable employee is praised until layoffs arrive. The indispensable one survives even if disliked. Why? Because admiration costs nothing. Replacement costs everything. Scarcity is power's silent ally. When skills are common, people are disposable. When capabilities are rare, people become protected assets. This is where most people misunderstand influence. They invest heavily in being agreeable. They avoid conflict. They seek approval, but approval does not create leverage. Dependence does. Replacement anxiety is the hidden mechanism. If losing you causes inconvenience, you are optional. If losing you causes disruption, you are dangerous to remove. Machiavelli warned rulers to never rely on love alone. Love fluctuates, fear fluctuates, but necessity anchors behavior. This does not mean becoming cold or exploitative. It means understanding the difference between emotional validation and structural value. People will praise you publicly and abandon you privately. They will compliment your character and eliminate your position. They will celebrate your kindness until it interferes with outcomes. Mental unbreakability requires accepting this without bitterness. You do not become necessary by demanding importance. You become necessary by solving problems others cannot. You become the bridge others must cross, the system others rely on, the function that cannot be removed without cost. This creates a different kind of security, not loud, not visible, but resilient. The paradox is unsettling. The more you chase being liked, the easier you are to replace. The more you focus on becoming useful, the less approval matters, and over time, approval follows necessity, not the other way around. Machiavelli never advised rulers to seek love. He advised them to avoid dependence on it, because when survival is at stake, people protect what sustains them, not what flatters them. This lesson is not about manipulation. It is about grounding your worth in function, not perception. Likes fade, praise evaporates, reputation shifts, but necessity creates gravity, and gravity bends behavior. The mentally unbreakable do not rely on being adored. They rely on being difficult to remove. They understand the final, uncomfortable truth. People may praise you, but they protect what they need. SOVI, fairness collapses in unstable systems. Why rules only work when power enforces them. Fairness feels permanent until the moment it isn't. We are raised to believe that rules are fixed, that justice is automatic, that if you follow the system will protect you. But history tells a harsher story. Rules do not protect people, power does. Fairness thrives only in calm water, in stable systems, in environments where consequences are predictable and enforcement is consistent. The moment pressure enters, scarcity, fear, competition, threat, rules begin to bend, and then they break. Look at revolutions. Every revolution begins with moral language, justice, equality, fairness, liberation. But once survival is at stake, morality becomes flexible. Allies are excused. Enemies are condemned. Rules are applied selectively, not to uphold fairness, but to secure control. This isn't hypocrisy. It's human nature under threat. Machiavelli understood this long before modern psychology confirmed it. When systems destabilize, people do not abandon morality because they are evil. They abandon it because morality requires enforcement, and enforcement requires power. Without power, rules are suggestions, and suggestions do not survive chaos. Propaganda states demonstrate this with chilling precision. The same action is praised when performed by the loyal, and punished when performed by the disobedient. The rule never changed, only the power behind it did. Modern outrage culture works the same way. The language of fairness remains, but enforcement is uneven, emotional. One person is held accountable, another is misunderstood. Why? Because fairness is no longer the goal, control is. This is where fair people suffer most, not because fairness is wrong, but because fairness assumes a referee. It assumes neutral enforcement. It assumes shared standards. In unstable systems, those assumptions become liabilities. Fair people keep playing by rules that no longer exist. Manipulators adapt the moment enforcement disappears. Machiavelli warned rulers about this illusion. Laws without force, he observed, are powerless, and people who mistake moral language for protection are the first to be crushed when systems shift. This is the uncomfortable realization. Rules are not moral truths. They are agreements, and agreements only matter when someone has the power and the will to enforce them. Mental unbreakability begins when you stop confusing fairness with safety, when you learn to ask a different question: who enforces this rule? At what cost? And against whom? Because when enforcement disappears, morality becomes theater, and theater does not stop aggression. This does not mean abandoning ethics. It means abandoning ethical naivety. It means recognizing when the environment has changed. Stable systems reward fairness. Unstable systems reward adaptability. The tragedy is that fair people often lose not because they are wrong, but because they assume protection that no longer exists. They appeal to rules while others appeal to power. They seek justice while others secure leverage, and leverage always speaks louder. Machiavelli's lesson is not cruel. It is preventative. He is not telling you to break rules. He is telling you to understand when rules have already broken, because only then can you protect yourself without illusions. Fairness without power is fragile. Fairness without awareness is dangerous. The mentally unbreakable do not abandon principles. They abandon fantasies. They understand the final truth of unstable systems. Rules only work when power enforces them, and pretending otherwise is how good people lose everything. La sauveur, modern power trains you to self-censor. Obedience without chains. In the past, power announced itself loudly. Chains, laws, armies, prisons. You knew when you were being controlled because someone told you no. Today, power is quieter. It doesn't forbid speech. It prices it. You are free to say anything as long as you are willing to pay the cost, and most people aren't. This is the genius of modern control. No censor knocks on your door. No authority burns your words. Instead, algorithms adjust your visibility. Reputation systems shift your standing. Opportunities disappear without explanation. Nothing is banned. Everything is discouraged. Machiavelli understood something timeless is, people obey not only out of fear of punishment, but fear of loss. In the digital age, that loss is social, status, reach, belonging, employability, safety within the group. Modern power does not silence dissent. It makes dissent expensive. And when speech has a price, most people begin negotiating with themselves. Is this worth posting? Is this worth saying out loud? Is this worth the risk of being misunderstood? Notice what's happening. The authority never intervened. You did. This is obedience without chains. Algorithms don't need ideology. They only need incentives. What gets rewarded becomes repeated. What gets punished quietly disappears. Over time, people internalize the system. They don't ask, "What do I believe?" They ask, "What is safe to believe?" Reputation economies intensify this pressure. Your value becomes public, searchable, permanent. A single deviation can define you. A single misstep can outweigh years of conformity. So people smooth their edges. They soften their thoughts. They trade truth for acceptability, not because they were forced, but because exclusion hurts more than silence. This is where Machiavelli's insight becomes chillingly modern. Power is most effective when it feels voluntary. When people police themselves, authority becomes invisible. No tyrant could design a system more efficient than one where citizens censor their own minds. And the most dangerous part, it doesn't feel like oppression. It feels like being reasonable. You tell yourself you're being strategic, professional, polite, but slowly something erodes your capacity to think freely, to speak honestly, to tolerate disagreement. Mental unbreakability requires recognizing this pressure before it reshapes you, because the goal of modern power is not obedience through fear, it is obedience through comfort management. You are allowed to speak, as long as you don't disrupt the system that feeds you. You are allowed to question, as long as your questions remain aesthetic. Anything deeper becomes a liability. Machiavelli warned rulers to control appearances more than actions. Today, appearances control you. The fear is no longer punishment, it's invisibility. And invisibility feels like death in a reputation-driven world. So people choose safety over truth, silence over clarity, acceptance over accuracy. Not because they are weak, but because the incentives are precise. Mental resilience in this age requires a new skill, the ability to observe incentives without obeying them automatically, to ask who benefits if I stay silent. What fear is guiding this hesitation? Is this caution wisdom or conditioning? This does not mean speaking recklessly. It means thinking independently, because once your thoughts are shaped by fear of exclusion, you are no longer free, even if no one is holding the key. Machiavelli would recognize this system instantly. Power that hides itself is power that lasts. And the final, unsettling realization is this: modern power doesn't silence you. It trains you to silence yourself. Mental unbreakability begins the moment you see that training and decide consciously when to comply And when not to lossulvihan, ruthlessness is not cruelty, it is clarity without sentimentality. Most people recoil when they hear the word ruthless. They imagine violence, coldness, a moral collapse. But Machiavelli meant something far more unsettling and far more precise. Ruthlessness is not cruelty. It is the refusal to lie to yourself when sentiment clouds judgment. Cruelty enjoys harm. Ruthlessness avoids self-destruction. The confusion between the two has cost generations their strength. From childhood, we are taught a dangerous equation, that kindness means endless accommodation, that empathy requires self-sacrifice, that being good means saying yes even when every instinct screams no. But here is the uncomfortable truth. Those who mistake kindness for obligation are the easiest people to exploit, because they confuse compassion with compliance. Machiavelli observed this pattern long before psychology named it. Those who cannot endure the discomfort of disappointing others will eventually betray themselves. Ruthlessness, as he understood it, is emotional discipline, the ability to feel deeply without being ruled by those feelings. Modern psychology confirms this. People with poor emotional boundaries are not more moral, they are more predictable, and predictability is leverage. Ruthlessness is the moment you stop explaining your boundaries to people who benefit from you having none. It is strategic restraint, knowing when not to act, when not to rescue, when not to bleed publicly for approval. In nature, unchecked generosity is not admired, it is consumed. Yet we tell ourselves stories to soften this reality. We call self-erasure being nice. We call exhaustion being loyal. We call silence being patient. But Machiavelli would call it what it is: voluntary vulnerability in a world that does not promise protection. This does not mean abandoning empathy. It means refusing to turn empathy into a weapon against yourself. There is a profound difference between compassion and compulsion. Compassion is chosen. Compulsion is conditioned. One is strength. The other is programming. Ruthlessness is saying, I will help, but not at the cost of my agency. I will care, but not blindly. I will be kind, but not narpor. This kind of ruthlessness feels uncomfortable at first, because it breaks an internal rule you were rewarded for following. But notice what happens when you practice it. Manipulators retreat. Exploiters lose interest. Chaos finds someone else to feed on, not because you became cruel, but because you became clear. Clarity is threatening in a world that survives on confusion. And this is why ruthless people are often mislabeled. They are not heartless. They are unmovable. They do not react on command. They do not negotiate with guilt. They do not trade self-respect for approval. Machiavelli never taught people to harm others unnecessarily. He taught them something far more radical: to stop offering themselves as sacrifices to systems that reward weakness disguised as virtue. Mental unbreakability requires this distinction, because kindness without boundaries is not morality, it is vulnerability without defense. And in every age, from Renaissance courts to digital platforms, that vulnerability is harvested. Ruthlessness is not the absence of heart. It is the presence of self-respect under pressure. And once you understand that, you stop asking whether ruthlessness makes you bad and start asking whether blind kindness has been quietly destroying you all along. Lesson NEX. Mental unbreakability is awareness, not dominance. You are not meant to rule, only to see clearly. At the end of every lesson about power, there is a temptation. The temptation to dominate, to outmaneuver, to become the very force you once feared. But Machiavelli's final insight is quieter and far more dangerous to ignore. Mental unbreakability is not about ruling others. It is about refusing to be ruled unconsciously. Because manipulation does not require your consent, only your ignorance. Power has never waited for people to understand it before acting on them. It moves whether you believe in it or not, shapes behavior whether you acknowledge it or not. This is the uncomfortable truth Machiavelli was pointing toward all along. Innocence is not protection. Good intentions are not armor. Morality alone does not stop exploitation. Awareness does. Machiavelli has been misunderstood for centuries because people assumed his work was aspirational, that he was teaching people what to do. In reality, he was teaching people what to notice, how fear distorts judgment, how appearances replace truth, how power rewards outcomes, not intentions, how emotional reactivity creates obedience without chains. He was not offering domination as a goal. He was offering clarity as an exit, because the most effective systems of control do not announce themselves. They feel normal, they feel moral, they feel inevitable. They tell you what to feel, when to be outraged, who to admire, what to fear losing. And if you never question those incentives, you will swear you are free while behaving exactly as expected. Mental unbreakability begins when that spell breaks, when you stop asking, "What should I do?" and start asking, "Why do I feel compelled to do this right now?" That pause, that single moment of awareness, is where control weakens. You begin to see patterns instead of stories, incentives instead of outrage, structures instead of villains. You realize that most conflicts are not moral battles. They are leverage contests disguised as principles. And once you see that, you stop wasting energy trying to win imaginary wars. You conserve it. You choose where to engage. You decide what deserves your attention. This is why true mental strength often looks boring from the outside. It does not posture. It does not perform outrage. It does not seek applause. It observes, because the goal is not to become ruthless toward others, but to stop being ruthless toward yourself through ignorance, to stop donating your emotions to systems that profit from agitation, to stop sacrificing clarity for comfort, to stop mistaking reactivity for virtue. Machiavelli understood something that modern culture resists. You do not need to control the game to survive it. You need to understand it. Once you do, manipulation loses much of its power, not because it disappears, but because it becomes visible, and what is visible can be resisted, redirected, ignored. This is the paradox of awareness. It does not make you powerful in the way movies promise. It makes you ungovernable in the ways that matter. You no longer chase approval. You no longer fear exclusion as deeply. You no longer confuse noise with truth. You become harder to provoke, harder to shame, harder to steer, not because you are superior, but because you are awake. And this is where Machiavelli leaves us, not with a command, not with a doctrine, but with a mirror. He asks nothing of you except honesty. Honesty about how power actually works. Honesty about how often you've been moved without noticing. Honesty about whether you want comfort or clarity. Because now that you see the game, the incentives, the leverage, the silent conditioning, there is only one question left. Will you keep pretending it isn't real? Ot Rao, the quiet strength that remains. What happens after illusion breaks? When illusions break, there is no explosion, no applause, no victory music. There is only silence, and in that silence something unsettling happens. The world doesn't change, you do. You stop expecting fairness to save you. You stop mistaking noise for power. You stop believing that being good guarantees protection. This is the moment most people turn back. They rush to rebuild comforting stories. They look for heroes, slogans, movements, saviors, anything that promises certainty again. But mental unbreakability does not live there. It lives here, in restraint, in observation, in the refusal to be pulled into every outrage, every performance, every emotional trap. Machiavelli was never offering a path to domination. He was offering an exit from delusion. He understood something most people never want to face. The world does not reward innocence, and it does not punish manipulation automatically. It simply reacts to awareness, or the lack of it. The strongest minds are not aggressive. They are inaccessible. They do not broadcast every thought. They do not announce every intention. They do not confuse transparency with virtue. They watch. They wait. They choose their battles carefully, or not at all, because once you see how power actually works, you stop trying to fight every force head-on. You stop begging systems to be moral. You stop explaining yourself to people who profit from misunderstanding you. You conserve energy. You protect attention. You move quietly. This is not cynicism. It is sobriety. You still feel empathy, but you no longer bleed for those who would use it against you. You still value kindness, but you no longer offer it blindly. You still engage with the world, but on your terms. Mental unbreakability is not becoming harder. It is becoming clearer, clear about incentives, clear about human nature, clear about when to speak and when silence is the only winning move. No slogans remain at the end of this path, no banners to carry, no audience to impress, just a quiet strength that does not need validation. Because once illusion breaks, the greatest power is this: to see the game and no longer feel the need to play it the way others expect. And the screen goes dark.